Hello. We live in a tiny village in the Scottish Highlands in the Grampian Mountains in the Cairngorm region. We're just on the edge of the national park, and this village is called Tarland. Just 700 inhabitants, but it puts on the most incredible music and food festival every year. And this was the 10th year that they've done this. And so there's a variety of events, all sorts of events, from beekeeping to collecting mushrooms to history walks to music events of all kinds, particularly Scottish music. So fiddle music and bagpipes and other kinds of pipes, and then bands that come in and do concerts in the evening. I would love to show you, for example, Migvy Church, Migvy Kirk. It's a tiny little chapel on a hill in a farm area just up from here, where Paul Anderson, the local incredibly gifted musician and fiddler, was giving us a recital. But anyway, in the last event of the whole weekend was what they called Scots Worship at a small church, sort of chapel, about 2 miles from Tarland towards Aboyne. It's called Coull Kirk, they call it in Scots, and it was all to do with Scots worship, and we had prayers in all the different kind of Scots languages. So the local language here is Doric, quite different, is a strong dialect. Recognizably, sort of you'll recognize some words, but an awful lot you won't. Then there's the Gaelic, of course, spoken in the West, and then there was the Shetland language, and then there's just the ordinary traditional broad Scots language, which has a lot of words and phraseology and is very different from English as well. So we had all of that together with some lovely Scottish music and traditional various different eras, really. But I was asked to give a talk in the midst of this, very privileged to be asked in this, my first year of actually living here. We've been here for many years in terms of visitors. And the minister of the local church asked me to do a talk on Celtic Christianity or Celtic spirituality and nature. So I wanted to share this with you, mainly because after the short talk, I've tried to keep it within 10 minutes. A lot of people afterwards said, oh, that's given us a lot of food for thought, and very interesting, and it's going to be published in the local parish magazine. So you might be interested in it as well. So here it is anyway. I'm just sharing it with you. Unfortunately, I can't share it with you in the live atmosphere of the church, which would have been great fun. I wasn't ahead of myself enough to record the actual event. Anyway, so this is what I said. The original Celtic inhabitants of Scotland viewed nature as sacred. Every tree, rock, stream, or mountain was imbued with spirit. Each place had its own guardian spirit. The natural world was to be treated with respect, and they felt themselves to be intimately part of nature, belonging to, rather than possessing, the land in which they lived. But they also believed that some spirits were friendly and some were to be feared. So you had to placate them to get on the right side of them, and one had to know how to navigate the territory in which one lived. Well, this was the worldview of the Druids and of many peoples of the ancient world. The early Celtic missionaries saw fit to learn from the people as much as to teach the people to whom they were passing on the Christian faith. Theirs was a mystical, experiential, bottom-up version. It was very different from the rather dogmatic, top-down, power-over version of the faith that Christianity evolved into after the Roman Church got into bed with Roman imperial culture. So rather than riding roughshod over the indigenous pagan culture, they presented Christianity as the next stage in the evolution of pagan culture. And instead of removing the symbols and practices of Druidic culture, as had been the strategy of missionaries in Europe, such as St. Boniface, who famously cut down a sacred tree, they presented Christianity as a kind of upgraded paganism. To present the Christian faith as such, they deliberately went into places that locals were afraid of, because they viewed them as being places where there was a demonic presence, or where they might incur the wrath of the spirit that dwelt there. They went into caves, for example, or they went into waters that were moved by forces that frightened people. They demonstrated, therefore, that all of nature was filled with a loving, warm presence of the one source of all reality and life. And in this way, they redeemed these places for the indigenous pagans. One of the aspects of Celtic spirituality that the missionaries took advantage of was the belief that one should not bring weapons of warfare, such as swords and spears, near trees that were viewed as sacred. So that gave them a safe place in which to engage with the people to whom they were presenting the good news of Jesus and his non-violent way of clashing with the powers that be. For the ancient Celtic Christians, paradise, the Garden of Eden, so to speak, was just a touch away if only we knew how to reach out and connect with it. And these early Celtic saints saw no conflict between being a Druid and being Christian. Spiritual practices such as immersing yourself in prayer in cold water, well, much as the well-known Wim Hof does today, was not so much about self-flagellation, which is the way it is commonly presented, but about simply immersing yourself in nature, which is imbued with spirit and is itself reaching out to the divine, is praising God. The story of Cuthbert immersing himself in the sea and otters appearing and drying his feet is a good example of this. What Celtic Christianity teaches us is that rather than being above nature, humanity, human beings, are intimately part of and connected with nature. So according to this view, nature is not just to be matter to be plundered and consumed for our benefit, but is alive and at a certain level conscious and filled with spirit, and therefore to be respected. It is unfortunate that a verse in the creation story in Genesis, in one of our English translations, well, Genesis chapter 1, I should say, in many of our English translations, gives the impression that God instructs humans to have dominion over nature, when scholars agree that it could equally be translated as rule together with, within, alongside nature. That is, that our role as humans is to help nature to fulfill its purpose. Unfortunately, this nature-friendly version of Christianity came into conflict with the more imperial version of Christianity. The clash came to a head at a synod held at Whitby in 664 CE. Though this is presented by most historians as a debate about the date of Easter, which Celtic churches calculated in a different way from the Roman Church, and the shape of the tonsure, both of which seem to us to be fairly trivial matters, it was actually more about the clash of two visions of reality, two different world views, and therefore two modes of being Christian. One was a top-down power-over model, and the other a bottom-up and inclusive model. One example of this is the way that women were empowered in the Celtic Church and denied power in the Roman Church. Sadly, the Roman clerics were more skilled in debate, and the Celtic Church was absorbed into the Roman Church's power structures. Today, there is another clash of worldviews. For centuries, the Western world has assumed that nature and all that we see in the universe and can measure with our scientific instruments is mere matter to be manipulated for our benefit. But cutting-edge cosmology and the latest advances in science are challenging this view. Scientists are beginning to realize that what the ancients knew intuitively and experienced to be the nature of reality is actually the way things are. All of nature is conscious at one level or another, and the energy of a universal consciousness out of which everything emerged in the Big Bang, or more accurately, Big Breath, pervades all of reality and continues to pervade all of reality, and out of which all that we see and experience actually emerges. We're all connected in one universal network of energy. The terms dark matter or dark energy are only dark to us because we cannot see it directly and measure it. Now, the ancients understood and experienced this to be the spiritual dimension of the natural world. In the ancient Hebrew traditions, this was called the heavens, as opposed to the physical dimension of the natural world called earth. So if we are to overcome the current ecological and economic crisis that is facing us in the world today and deal seriously with the threat of climate change and all its consequences, we need to recover that intimate connection with and deep respect for nature that Celtic Christianity fostered.